Welcome back, psychologists. I'm your professor, Ryan Keith. You guys probably remember, as well as I do, as well as any of us can, years and years back, about the phenomenon of the dress. The one where, remember, we'd look at it and either you saw the dress as white and gold or blue and black. And this was something that shook us in a way that many optical illusions didn't. And I remember for me, the reason it shook me is that the first time I looked at it, I didn't really pay much attention to the posts themselves or the text of what was going on. All I knew is that people were arguing about the color of some silly dress. And I remember dialing up this picture of this white and gold dress, looking at it and holding the picture up to my wife and just saying like, yeah, there's some really weird thing on the internet. I don't know what it is, but just tell me, what color do you think this is? And I remember how she transformed before my very eyes from the woman I loved into some sort of psychotic alien monster as she stated that this picture was of a blue and black dress. It shocked me to my core because no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't see it the way that she saw it, much less consider it when I didn't know that it was even a possibility. And for me, this was informative, not just as like a funny optical illusion or an interesting way to understand how our eyes worked, but it pulled back the veil on how difficult it is to see things from another person's perspective. And that's really, in a big way, what it is we're talking about here all semester long, and why I am so excited about this week and this week's material. This week's material is arguably some of the most difficult material in the whole class. Not because there are a ton of concepts or because the concepts themselves are convoluted, but because understanding these concepts asks you to do something that is, at the very least, something that we don't do very often, but for many of us, something that makes us deeply, deeply uncomfortable, which is that it asks us to critically and deeply question so many things that we take for granted. Whether it's something that we see with our eyes, realizing that perhaps the world out there is not at all the one that we see in front of us. Hello, Finn. Hello, Elijah. I stole their ball so that they couldn't keep making noise with it while I recorded a video. But, that perhaps even the people around us, even we ourselves, are not the people that we imagine ourselves to be. Around the same time that the thing with the dress happened, this is a real serious thing, but around the time that the dress happened, I was just really beginning my teaching career. And for a period of years, because of the teaching experience, I dealt with recurring crippling panic attacks as the result of social anxiety, that I would make it through teaching a class and I would feel this wave of relief as it was over. And then with the dawning realization that a mere 48 hours later, I would have to do the same thing all over again, I would again be gripped by anxiety. And because of this experience, even I, as a psychology instructor, was resistant to going to see a professional. But I met with a counselor, with a therapist, who helped me understand something that I'd never even thought about before, that perhaps this anxiety wasn't something being done to me, that it wasn't some unstoppable force over which I had no control, that it was perhaps something that if I had the right tool, if I had the right perspective, I could decide when and where to feel it and exactly how much of it was appropriate. Sorry, guys, as I push these guys out of the way. Up until then, I had never even considered the possibility that I might be in control of my own emotions or my own thoughts. So often we take these things for granted, that something simply makes us mad, or that we just think of something without any control over how that happens. And this week's material, the textbook chapter, the videos, the 2 podcasts that I've asked you to listen to, are really all about understanding why it is we think things the way that we do. Now, what in the world does that have to do with social psychology? Well, if we can understand why we think things in general the way that we do, we can understand why we see the people around us the way that we do, and how their presence affects the way that we see ourselves. After all, one of the biggest things that we'll talk about this week is how inaccurately we see the world, that we jump to conclusions all the time, that these quick mental shortcuts and shortcomings help us understand the world quickly and easily and conveniently, but so often are wrong. That the person whose situation we blame on poor personality qualities or bad choices, that maybe their situation is just worse than ours, that they're suffering in ways that we didn't realize, that maybe we have made the very same mistakes they have, but that we were just lucky enough to have social situations that prevented us from falling into the same traps. So this week, one of my biggest pieces of advice is to get started early, because sometimes it'll take you a few times to wrap your head around these concepts. Second, find real world examples. The example from the oatmeal, as well as the podcast from Tim Harford's Cautionary Tales, are really built around trying to help us understand how these shortcomings happen to us. As it turns out, psychologists are more prone than most people to falling prey to these mental shortcomings because we know about them. So we might imagine that we are immune when in fact these things happen to us all the time. Chances are many of you guys have heard about overconfidence and confirmation bias and even the Dunning-Kruger effect, and imagine that it's something that only the most foolish among us fall prey to, but in fact we all do it all the time. So starting early studying this, finding examples in the real world, and then thinking like a social psychologist, taking that next step and trying to figure out how the world around us really works is going to be the key to doing well this week and honestly every week this semester. So with that, I hope you find this stuff fun, enjoyable, and interesting. If you are confused or excited, or you just want to talk to somebody about something, hit me up and let me know, and I will be excited to hear from you and talk about social cognition. Until then, I'm your professor, Ryan Keith, and this is Social Psychology. Okay, guys.